In episode 3, we focus on the other gay hockey player in the MHL. Yeah, believe it or not, Shane and Ilya are not the only ones. There is another one, and we have met him. He is Scott Hunter, the New York Admirals captain. And yeah, in case you're wondering, this means that when Shane went to Ilya's at the All-Star game and he was all worried about Scott Hunter catching him, it could have been a three-way. But anyway, this picks up about 4 months before the Sochi Olympics, at the start of the season, where Scott and the Admirals are struggling, and he is under a lot of scrutiny because he's the captain. He's on a run, he's listening to a podcast to rip him apart, and he stops off at a local smoothie spot to just grab some, grab a smoothie, obviously. That's what you do with those things. But it's the barista who catches his eye. The barista's name is Kip, and he has no idea who Scott Hunter is because he doesn't watch hockey. But he's very nice. He offers to make Scott his specialty smoothie that only he makes for himself. Scott grabs it. He gives him a giant tip because ultimately he wants to give him the tip, and then he heads out. And as soon as he leaves the place, a customer walks in and goes, Are you serious? That was Scott Hunter. And Kip doesn't know who that is, and neither does his coworker. And the guy explains, yeah, he plays for the Admirals. He's a hockey player. And that's when it really hits Kip. Oh, shit. That's why that guy tipped me so much money. And it all makes sense. That night, Kip, along with the coworker who works with him at the smoothie place, go to the gay bar where they meet up with another friend, and they're watching the Admirals game on TV, which is a big departure. One of the things that his coworker really focuses on is the fact that Scott kept repeating Kip's name. And for Kip, he just doesn't think anything really of it. He just figures that there's no way Scott is gay, but they are pretty excited about the fact that Kip seems to know Scott. Scott seems to know Kip. And the next morning, the interest becomes real because Scott steps back into the place where Kip is surprised to see him. He immediately lets Scott know that he is aware of who he is at this point, and he saw the game the previous night, but he also admits, I don't really watch hockey too much. Scott goes on to explain that when he has a good game, he just repeats the process. And that's why he's back. He wants the same smoothie. Again, Scott leaves a giant tip, and then he heads out. But he once again repeats Kip's name, and it's driving him insane. After the second encounter, though, it just seems like maybe there is something to this for Scott. He meets up with his best friend Elena at that same gay bar later that night because he has to tell somebody else about this. The first thing she does, though, is say, hey, you are going to that gala with me, right? That benefit? And he says, yeah, no, don't worry, I'll be there. It's 2 months away. But no, like, with this whole Scott thing, it's weird. Like, the way he says my name, it's driving me nuts. She asks him what Maria, the other barista, says, and Kip tells her she thinks he's flirting with me too. She then sees him on the TV. She understands the appeal and asks him when's the next home game, and it's Saturday. Unfortunately, though, Kip isn't scheduled to work, which she tells him, yeah, you're going to need to work. Figure it out. And he does. And sure enough, the Admirals win, and in walks Scott. Only this time, they're not going to do the same song and dance where Scott tips and then he leaves. He asks him, hey, I got some emails to answer. Do you mind if I just do it here? Which is a super weird question because it's a cafe. But anyway, Kip says, yeah, go ahead. And while Scott is, quote, answering emails in the corner, Kip is eye-fucking the hell out of him. After a little bit, though, Scott lets on that he wasn't actually answering emails. He tells Kip that he was taking a quiz to figure out if he's a serial killer or not. Apparently he's not, but it sparks a chat between the two. A flirtatious chat. One where Kip lets Scott know that he is gay because he tells him, yeah, in the playoffs, you guys all grow those beards and it gives a hot lumberjack look. To which Scott awkwardly just stares at the floor. It makes things really, really awkward between the two, but Scott ends up redeeming himself by saying, hey, I got 2 tickets for tonight. No one's going to use them. Do you want to go? To which Kip excitedly says, yeah, absolutely. And he takes Elena. And while the two are sitting in these seats provided by Scott Hunter, they're watching warm-ups, and Scott gives Kip a nod. Elena noticed it. Kip acts like, no, he wasn't nodding at me. And then Scott flat out waves at him, and now it's quite obvious who Scott was looking at. Unfortunately for Scott, he needs to go on the road, and his next 2 games do not go well. He gets beat by Ilya pretty bad, and Ilya talks a whole bunch of smack, and then he gets beat by Shane. And Shane's smack talk is terrible. He just looks at him and says, hey, next time we play each other, why don't you show up? But this is the second bad loss in a row for the Admirals, and Scott doesn't take kindly to it, so he just looks at Shane and says, "You're starting to sound like him." And Shane knows exactly who he's referring to, obviously Ilya, and Shane doesn't take kindly to that. And the two actually end up fighting at the end of the game, which is very unlike either of them. For Scott, all he wants to do is get back to New York and likely get back to Kip, who, by the way, lives at home alone with his dad, who was very supportive. But in order to make extra money, Scott takes extra jobs, like a catering job. And in one particular party, he's doing that catering job when he runs into a very rude woman, but he's saved by Scott. He had no idea Scott was going to be there, so this is kind of a thrill for him. And then the two spark up a conversation about how the food at these things suck. And Scott says, "Do you want to get food after this with me?" Kip can't say yes fast enough, and after the gala, they meet up, but the restaurant they were going to is a little too packed, and Scott decides to pivot by saying, "Why don't we just order at my place?" Only Kip is unaware that Scott is going to be the meal, or actually Kip is going to be the meal, because when they get there, Scott ends up taking his shirt off and saying, "Do you want a tour now or later?" And the tour is going to be of his body, and yeah, Scott's definitely a top. The two immediately end up hooking up. At the end of it, Kip goes to leave because he just thinks that's, what you're supposed to do. But Scott actually tells him, "No, stay." And Kip stays the night. And the next morning, Kip goes to once again leave. And Scott says, "No, look, I actually like you. I don't do this. I've never brought anybody back to my place. So that's how much you mean to me. And I have to go to practice now. But when I come back, I'd really like it if you were here." And for Kip, that's an easy answer. New York penthouse apartment or at home with your dad in Queens. Yeah, he picks the apartment. They also, by the way, have a conversation about how hard it is for Scott to come out, how he feels like eventually he'll do it, but it'll be after his playing career. Scott then heads off to practice, and when he returns, Kip is waiting for him in his apartment, and that really sparks the courtship. For months, the process would repeat itself, with Scott going off to practice or games, coming back and making out with Kip and hooking up with him. They both were really, really happy. When Scott was on the road, Kip would still stay at the apartment, which was kind of concerning to his dad because his dad didn't know where he was. But Kip would reassure him, "No, I'm just staying at a friend's place. Don't worry about it. I'll be home eventually." The thing is, though, Kip couldn't tell anybody because Scott was still in the closet and a celebrity, mind you. So even though it was obvious to all of his friends that something was going on with Kip because he was coming around less, he just acted like he didn't have a boyfriend, which was funny because there you've got Scott on the TV, everybody watching him, and that's his boyfriend. Although to some people it became very obvious. Like Maria, his barista friend, when Scott would come in, he would only want Kip. They would flirt like crazy. Kip would deny it, not convincingly. Though one day they decided to step out together. Now, it wasn't Scott's idea, but Kip was looking at an artist that he really likes. Scott said, "I could use some art in this place," and they headed to the gallery. Scott, dressed in a hat, sunglasses inside, a hoodie, trying not to get noticed, where for Kip, it was no big deal. This culminates in Scott actually leaving the gallery when they were asked just a few questions by the person running the place. Scott was terrified of getting noticed with him and maybe ending up on page 6. He rushed back to his apartment. When Kip met him back there, he apologized and he said, "Look, I thought I could do it, but I can't." That's how difficult stepping out with Kip is for Scott, and it also shines a light on the anxiety he has about getting outed. Kip cheers him up, though, a little while later because Scott, while getting ready for a road trip, is packing all his things, and Kip gives him a present. It's a pair of blue socks with bananas on it, and it reminded Kip of what kind of brought them together. Blue Moon over Brooklyn, the drink that he made him with a banana. Scott loves it. He actually wears the socks the next game under his skates, and he sends Kip a picture of it. And for hockey players who are pretty superstitious, this is a big deal. But boy, does it work, because Scott ends up scoring a hat trick. Kip ended up watching the entire game at the bar with Elena, but finally she's the one to really call him on the bullshit that he's been spewing the past couple months about not having a boyfriend. Because again, regarding all of this, Kip has been a terrible liar. And not only is it obvious that Kip has a boyfriend, it's obvious who it is. So Elena pulls it out of him, which is actually a big relief to Kip. He's been wanting to tell somebody. But Elena is the friend you need, because she just cuts him off and says, "Here's what I know. I know you're in love with him," which Kip denies, but is probably true. And then she asks him, have you told your dad? And he says, no, it's been going on for like 2 months. He probably just thinks I'm hooking up with some random guy. Kip's main concern, though, is Elena outing Scott. He wants to protect him at all costs. And Elena's like, dude, I would never do that. But, like, what is the plan? And he doesn't have one. It's just a fluid situation. But he assures her, I've never been happier. And really, she's just very concerned for her friend, who is clearly falling for this guy. But her friend, who is also out as a gay guy, but appears to be in a closeted relationship. And that's got to be tough. The two, though, link up at the gala the next day, and it just so happens to be a gala where Scott Hunter is the keynote speaker. So this actually all works out. Kip, dressed up in a tux that Scott got him, he's looking great, and Scott eventually excusing himself to go say hi to Kip. But when he sees Elena, he tries to play it off like, oh, hey, I kind of remember you. What's going on? And Elena immediately sets the tone that we're not going to play this game. I know you two are hooking up. I'll go get you guys drinks. Scott, though, handles this pretty well. He doesn't freak out at Kip, and Kip assures him, look, Elena kind of pulled it out of me, but I assure you she can keep a secret. And the two just start having normal conversation, but they're doing so where they're facing the opposite direction as to not raise any alarms. When Elena does come back, though, she demands to dance with Scott. And when they get out on the dance floor, she wants to know his intentions because she is concerned for her friend. She tells Scott he's crazy about you, and Scott says, I'm crazy about him too. And she says, okay, but he's also miserable. And it's because of the closeted relationship and the closeted nature of their relationship. And while Scott understands that, he can't come out. He can't make it known that he's dating Kip. Scott kind of wants his cake and he eat it too. But that all comes crashing down later that night. When Kip and Scott get back to Scott's apartment, Kip brings up the fact that his birthday is coming up. And they're throwing him a little bit of a party at that bar that he always goes to. He does tell Scott it's a gay bar, but he also says, look, everybody there kind of just knows that I make you smoothies. That's it. He really, really wants Scott to come, but Scott tells him, Kip, I can't. And Kip understands, but he's broken by it. Because he does just want to spend one night with Scott, not in the apartment, out, just hanging out like normal people. But here's Scott telling him, no, that ain't going to happen. And that's when Kip has to quasi-break up with him. I mean, it's not really a breakup, but he just tells Scott, look, I heard your speech and you talked about family and how hockey's family, and I get that. But you know what, Scott, I have a family. So tonight, I think I'm going to go home. And he does that. He leaves Scott alone in the apartment. He heads back to be with his dad. And when he gets to the door, he just starts crying. And his dad, being a great dad, just hugs him, having no idea what the issue is, but just wanting to be there for his son. Fast forward a couple days later, and they do have that party for Kip at that bar. And Scott is outside watching it, but never going in. Although Kip was always on Scott's mind. Because when Scott heads to the Olympics to represent Team USA, he's still wearing those socks. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel and subscribing to my Patreon. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. If you left a comment, I don't get back to you. I usually don't check the comments unless they're like a super comment. Also, if you don't see the next video up on the end screen, not to worry. It'll be up in a day or two.